everyone. My name is Gina Arenas. I am a program manager on the Microsoft Graph team, and today I'm here with Daryl.
Hi, I'm Daryl Miller. I'm a PM. I work for Gina on the developer experience team.
Today we're going to talk about Microsoft Graph and a deep dive for developers, so let's get started. Okay, so here's the takeaways for today. First, we're going to learn about how to use Microsoft Graph to power your app experiences. What are the types of apps that you can build with Microsoft Graph? And then the tips and best practices that you can use while using Microsoft Graph in your applications. So without further ado, let's get started with what is Microsoft Graph. So I want to post a definition for what is Microsoft Graph. Microsoft Graph is the Microsoft 365 data that describes the patterns of productivity, identity, and security in an organization. It is this fabric of interconnected data that has all of the patterns and virtuous cycles between the people and the content and the signals of all of the activity that they do in our services. So all of that interconnected data is what is behind Microsoft Graph. Now, it is for individual users and also for organizational users. So if you think about all of the data that we have on the service, that we have for the different types of experiences that we have in Microsoft 365, whether it is in Exchange or SharePoint or Azure Active Directory or Planner or OneNote or Excel or Intune or Windows, all of these different set of services and all of these different set of organizational data is exposed in the Microsoft Graph. Now, Microsoft Graph, of course, powers Microsoft 365 experiences. And I'm going to share with you 3 experiences in Microsoft 365 that are powered by Microsoft Graph. Let's start with Microsoft Teams. So Microsoft Teams offers a single pane for collaboration and productivity. You will see the calendar information, the conversations, the files that you have in OneDrive, all of the profile information. All of these set of experiences are actually powered by Microsoft Graph. Now, the next one is Delve. Delve provides all of the experience and insights for the users in the organization. It allows users to personalize and access the profile information. And also, it presents customers with contextual information and about the people that they work with and the files that they have that are relevant to them because of their working group. So all of these experiences are powered by Microsoft Graph and calculated based on the activity of the users that they have in our service. Now, the third experience is Microsoft Search. The new Microsoft Search experience is actually powered by Microsoft Graph. It's consolidating search across Office.com and SharePoint and Bing and Windows, across all of these Microsoft 365 canvases, and then just using the Microsoft Graph powering all of these experiences. So those are the 3 examples on how we use Microsoft Graph experiences in Microsoft 365, and we also have many more. Because Microsoft Graph powers Microsoft 365, whether it is with Office 365, Windows 10, or the Enterprise Mobility and Security Suite, Microsoft Graph is the data that powers all of these experiences. Now, the other thing is that Microsoft Graph can power your application experiences. At Microsoft, we actually build products and services that cater to a wide range of customers. We have industry verticals or every walks of life, whether it is consumer or commercial. Actually, the same Outlook that my kids use at school is also used by paralegals in the legal industry or by healthcare workers, medical professionals in the healthcare industry, or by retail or marketing, all of these different set of uses for the same tool, yet their needs for productivity are very different. So at Microsoft, we actually rely on our partners to help us tailor those experiences, to customize to the needs that our customers have and meet those specific needs. So your tailored experiences actually help us achieve that. Now, with the set of data that you can access across Microsoft Graph, gravitates across different centers of gravity. So whether it is productivity or communication or security or education or organization and management, content management, all of these are data sets that are available in the API. So when we talk about communication, for example, we have all of the meetings and chat messages and email conversations that are happening on the different set of services. That all of that is exposed in Microsoft Graph. When it comes to productivity, so we talked about all of the different set of calendar information and files and the set of activity of the users having the service. So all of these are centers of gravity for the data. Now, in order to really see what Microsoft Graph makes possible, I'm going to roll a video of what Build is doing today. So Build is an ISV based on Iceland, and they have created an application on top of Microsoft Teams that uses Microsoft Graph extensively. Their application is supporting remote learning for multiple schools across Europe, and it's helping them with remote learning, as I mentioned before. So let's take a look.
Hi, at Build we're creating educational solutions within Microsoft Teams. Thanks to Microsoft tools and technologies, we're able to develop features that meet the needs of today's classrooms. The Microsoft Graph and the Graph Toolkit are part of essential tools we use and have made our product development much easier and faster. The Build class list is a good example where we use the Microsoft Graph to pull in data from the educational roster and build classes with users and user data, such as emails and photos, so teachers and students can interact easily. It also provides the data for some of our class functionalities, and we use the Graph for teachers to create and start online class meetings with the students. The person card is the latest component we've implemented from the Microsoft Graph Toolkit and are currently customizing. The Toolkit team has done a great job to make it simple to implement and extend. In our planning module, we've used the Files API and SharePoint APIs to enable creation and management of all Microsoft 365 documents in a single place. I hope you're all having a great Microsoft Build experience.
Now that we've seen a partner use Microsoft Graph in their application, let me show you how you can get started in less than 3 minutes. I'm going to go to the Graph Developer Portal on graph.microsoft.com. Then we're going to click on this Getting Started. After clicking on Getting Started, I'm going to select the .NET Framework. Then I'm going to be presented with a set of experiences that I can use, including this Quick Start, in which we can build an app in less than 3 minutes. I'm going to keep the language of selection for my platform. Pick the language for our platform. I'm going to keep .NET. And then I'm going to go and register an application and get the secret. So this is going to do it for me. I'm going to go back and paste it into my Quick Start. And then the Quick Start is going to create a project with all of these different information that I'm going to be able to download. I'm going to provide feedback because there's always good to give feedback to the tools. And then I can go and look at this downloaded package and then just running Visual Studio. Now, I've already unzipped the package and run it. This is the same code. You can see that I'm using it's using all of the references. And the only thing that I've added here differently is that I've added a couple of breakpoints. Now, after building the project, let's try to run it. And what we're going to see is that it's going to load this ASP.NET web application. When I click sign in, it's going to prompt me for selecting the account that I want to use. So I'm going to pick this one, which is my demo account. And then it's going to hit the breakpoint. This is the breakpoint where I'm creating the first graph client with my SDK, and it's making the request to my user profile to get my name that is going to be displayed now in the application. Now, if I want to get to my calendar, we're going to hit the second breakpoint. And this actually is using again the .NET SDK to bring all of my calendar information. So this is the meetings that are currently on my demo account calendar. Now, if I want to extend this example, and I want to say, for example, add information about the files that I have on my OneDrive. So let's stop the project. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to select this code, and I'm going to copy it so that I can create a new class. In this new class, instead of getting an event, I'm going to get a drive item. So let's select drive item here, and then it's going to return actually a drive item. So let's change that. And this time around, I am going to actually remove this code that is calling for events. And then I know that what I'm going to return is a collection of children's. So I'm going to change that. Now, in order to get to the code that I need to make in this request, I'm going to go back to the portal, and I'm going to go to Graph Explorer. So Graph Explorer has this get example queries, and I'm going to select the one for my drive. Now, I can see that when I run the request, I get all of the information for my request, and I can pop out the preview of that, including the response headers and adaptive cars rendering of the cards and the code snippets. So it's very simple. I'll just copy the code snippet and then bring it back to my code. Now I'm going to paste it here. I already had a graph client, so I'm going to go and remove that. And then voila, I have ready a class that is interacting with my OneDrive files and enumerating them, and I can build the views to bring that back into my application. So that's how simple you can get started and add additional code to that calls the Microsoft Graph. So with that in mind, let me go back to the definition and complement it. So Microsoft Graph can be accessed through a set of tools that enable you to build productivity apps that integrate with Microsoft 365. So let's focus on that. Apps, tools, and data. The apps are the ones that you can extend our own experiences or you can create your own. Tools we have for developers, for citizen developers, and for IT pros, and the data is all of the data in Microsoft 365. So if we look at these three concepts, apps, tools, and data to access Microsoft 365, let's go over them. I'm going to start first with data. So we have over 20 trillion nodes of data across users, groups, and organizations in Microsoft Graph. But Microsoft, we actually don't own this data. This is data that it is your data, and we actually provide a service to it. So it's important to know that it's actually your data and not Microsoft's data. However, it's also important to know that there are hard boundaries across the data that Microsoft Graph has for each organization. So the data that does not cross organizational boundaries, for example, the data from Contoso does not cross boundaries with the data from Fabricam unless it's explicitly configured to do so. And third, any access to data requires consent. So callers must be authenticated and must have the right level of authorization granted for that application. For example, if I want an application that accesses my calendar information, it will need to specifically request that permission and that permission scope, which is calendar.read. And then the owner of that calendar data can consent and grant the application access to it. Now, in terms of the data available in Microsoft Graph, there are several popular data sets that we see and that have large applications that integrate with them, like mail, files, calendars, groups, conversations, tasks, teams, and more. And actually, there's, gazillions of data in Microsoft Graph. There's over 5,000 APIs. And I have some of these data sets listed here, but there's actually many, many more. And this is all of the data, back to what I was saying before, that powers the Microsoft 365 experiences. Now, we saw data. Now let's look at the tools. Tools, again, we have tools for developers, for citizen developers, and for IT pros. And I'm going to start with the tools for developers. Now, we have, in that case, interfaces, SDKs, and components. So in interfaces, we'll have the Microsoft Graph API, which basically is an HTTP API that allows you to get transactional data. And Microsoft Graph Data Connect and connectors allows you to move data in and out Microsoft Graph to power different app experiences. We'll take a look at that in a second. Then we have libraries in a variety of languages, and we have UX components with the Microsoft Graph toolkit that you can bring into your application with just a couple of lines of code. So let's get started with Microsoft Graph API. So Microsoft Graph API, as I mentioned, is an HTTP API. It's basic JSON formatted requests and responses that give you access to all of the user, group, and organizational information across all of the services that make part of Microsoft 365. So whether that's, Azure AD or Exchange or SharePoint or, Intune or Windows and all of the different services that we have across the entire suite, you can access all of the different schemas for that data using the API. This is a transactional API. It's a single endpoint, graph.microsoft.com, and then you access it with one authentication token. Next, set of connectors. So first, I'm going to talk about Microsoft Graph Data Connect. So Microsoft Graph Data Connect is a pipeline that allows you to securely move bulk data from Office 365 into Azure. So we have all of the data, and then we have all of the Azure tooling that you can use to process that data. If you're building a set of insights applications or analytics applications, they actually require a different kind of data. This is not transactional data. This is data that you require snapshots over a period of time. And this is the type of things that you can do with Data Connect. And then move all of that data into Azure Data Lake and then process it with all of the Azure tooling to generate insights. So for example, if you want to know, who knows what on the organization, or to join that data with other data that you have externally from your line of business services, and then, create all of those connections between people and data beyond the things that we do internally in Microsoft 365. So for that, you can use Microsoft Graph Data Connect. Then we have the Microsoft Graph connectors. So Microsoft Graph connectors allow you to index your own data into Microsoft Graph, whereas Microsoft Graph Data Connect allows you to move data out. Microsoft Graph connectors allow you to bring data in. And then it participates in Microsoft 365 experiences. In this case, it participates in Microsoft Search. So actually, let's see a demo on how we are indexing the APIs to bring in and participate into Microsoft, using the indexing APIs to bring in and participate in the Microsoft Search experiences. In this demo, I'm going to start in office.com and make a search request. If you notice, there is a column here that is called products. Well, this is an additional vertical that I've added. So let's get rolling. And the first thing that I'm going to do is if I click on products, well, I won't have any information, but I can go to the admin center and configure that result type. Now, after I could do the configuration, like selecting the content source from the connections that I have, I can select the rules and the layout. So here we're using adaptive cards to see the results displayed in the actual search experience. Now I'm going to go into Postman, and first I'm going to query the set of connections that we have. So remember, I have two connections here. First, when the request comes back, I'm going to see the products catalog connection and the Contoso HR connection. We're going to be adding data to the products catalog connection. So let's first see the schema of that connection. So I'm going to query that. And then I'm going to see all of the different set of entities that we're going to be adding to that particular schema. So product, image, description. Now let's try to see if there's already any items on that particular indexing. So there are no items, again, an item not found response. And the thing that I'm going to do right now is I'm going to iterate over the indexing API to add all of that information. So we're going to do this little run, and I'm going to select the API that we're going to run, so which is going to be indexing product catalog. I'm going to switch my variables, and then I'm going to bring in a file where I have all of the information. In this case, it's a catalog of information of toys from Microsoft. I'm going to load that file, and then I'm run it. At this point, it is adding all of and indexing all of this information, and then it's going to be able to participate in the search experience. So if I go back to Postman, I can go back to making that query. And now I'm going to see that in the body, I'm going to query for all of the different items that there are on this product catalog connection. If I run this request, now all of the items that we have indexed are going to appear right here on the search experience. Now let's go and query for one of these items. And going back to office.com, if I query, for example, for the item zombie, now we're going to see that actually that's going to come back. This is one of the items that we just uploaded. And I can also query for all of the items that we indexed, and they're right there. In SharePoint.com, we can also get the same experience. Now, this is how easy you can use our connectors to bring in data from external services, whether it is a line of business service or another file share or another cloud service, and bring it into Microsoft Graph so that it can participate in all of these Microsoft search experiences. Now, the next thing that I want to talk about is our libraries. So we have SDKs across a variety of different languages. And then, as we saw earlier, we have these 3-minute quick starts that you can use the SDKs, or we have step-by-step to 30-minute tutorials also using the SDKs, whether it is using .NET or Java or Objective-C or JavaScript or even PowerShell. We have all of these different set of experiences and libraries that you can use to power your application. And then finally, we talked about the components. So for components, we have our Microsoft Graph Toolkit, which is a collection of framework-agnostic web components that are powered by Microsoft Graph. They work with any framework, and then you can use them on web applications or in Teams tabs or in SharePoint web parts. And let me show you our playground for the Microsoft Graph Toolkit and see how you can get started adding Microsoft Graph Toolkit components into your applications. So this is MGT Dev, which is the Microsoft Graph Toolkit playground. The first component that I want to show you is the sign-in component. As you can see, you can add with one line of code, which is just simple HTML web framework agnostic components. And then users will be able to use this control to sign in into your web application using our Microsoft 365 identities. So here we have Megan Bowen signed in, and let's see some of the things that you can do. So we can have people as a people control, and then you can have also person card and agenda and login and all of that. Let's take a look at the person card. So person is going to give me profile information from Microsoft Graph, and it's going to be rendering that information in a way that it looks and feels like it belongs to the Microsoft 365 experiences. And then I can also go and extend that and template the person card with additional details. So imagine that you want to bring in information into the profile card that has maybe connecting with your HR system or to any other line of business system in your company. You can add that additional information right here into the card with just simple HTML. So let's go back to the deck. And this is, again, Microsoft Graph Toolkit, simple framework agnostic web components that you can add with one line of code. Now, if you're not a developer, well, we also have tools for you. So we have, of course, Power Apps and Power Automate and all of the Power Platform to build automated workflows, to build governance processes. And then we have PowerShell as well, that whether you're a professional developer, a citizen developer, or an IT admin, you can use to interact with all of the data in Microsoft Graph. Now let's talk about the applications that you can build. There's two things. One, applications that extend Microsoft 365 experiences, whether it is using documents or conversations and Teams tabs or bots or message extensions, or applications that you build your own experience separately, like your own web application or your own bot or a device app or a daemon application. Now, all of that together creates the Microsoft 365 platform. And we're offering this platform to build people-centric and productivity, identity, and security-focused experiences that increase the engagement of your application. Now, the foundation of this platform is, of course, Microsoft Identity, where we have all of the identity of the users across work and school and life for all of the users that we have in our service. And for developers, it uses the standard-based auth libraries that you can use to do sign-up flows, single sign-on, and an app model that enables the access to the data in Microsoft 365. Then we have Microsoft Graph, which is the gateway for your customers and data in the Microsoft Cloud, primarily in Microsoft 365. And the Microsoft Graph provides the core schema for many of the most important productivity data types. Microsoft Graph offers the REST API that enables transaction to access all of these applications that we were talking about, whether it is your own experiences or the Microsoft 365 or extending the Microsoft 365 experiences. And it also offers connectors. Now, the first one is Data Connect that allows you to bring bulk data out of Microsoft 365 into Azure to power all of your analytic applications. And the second one is Microsoft Graph Connectors, which allows you to bring data into Microsoft 365 to participate in our experiences like Microsoft Search. So I'm going to wrap up. Microsoft Graph, is the data that describe the patterns of productivity, identity, and security in your organization. You can have a variety of tools to access that data that enable you to build apps that integrate with Microsoft 365. Now, there is always constant things coming in new to Microsoft Graph. So in order to keep up to date to what's going on and all of the build announcements that we have for 2020, I recommend that you go to aka.ms/graph what's new. Now we're going to switch gears and we're going to see a series of tips and tricks that you can use to become a ninja coder with Microsoft Graph. Go ahead, Daryl, take it off.
Thank you very much, Gina. And we have 7 tips and tricks to be able to become a better Graph application developer. And we're going to start with Graph Explorer again. Now, I know Gina already showed a little bit of a demo of Graph Explorer, but we're going to dig a little bit further into Graph Explorer to understand what the things you can do as an application developer. When you are using Graph Explorer, it's not just about learning how to use Graph from the beginning. It's also about, whilst you're working with the application, you want to call a new API. And you can use the permissions tab to discover what consent, what scopes are needed in order to be able to call that. And if you're having problems getting your app to call that, you're having some kind of authorization problems, don't worry, go back to Graph Explorer and you can make the call, get it successful in Graph Explorer, grab that token, and then copy that token into your app and test for authorization problems. Don't forget to test for consumer and commercial accounts. Sometimes the behavior is a little bit different, whether you're using an Outlook.com account or whether you're using an enterprise account. You can get it working in Graph Explorer and then come back and test it in your application. And there's another very handy little header that you can add into Graph Explorer. By adding the accept header with this value, you get all kinds of additional metadata coming back to you so that you can see things like navigation properties and all kinds of other things to learn what other things that you can do from the data that you have got back from Graph Explorer. So here we have the set of standard Graph operations. Now, the thing that we try and do in Graph is you'll recognize the set of kind of CRUD operations, going in, getting a list of collections, going and get a member out of the collection. There shouldn't really be anything new there. And that's our intention. We're trying to, use the principle of least surprise and allow people to do the things that they're used to using. So if you want to create a new thing, you can post to a collection. You want to update it, you can either patch to update just a few values, or you can do a put to change the complete value. And of course, deleting is just as easy as you would expect it to be. But there are some other operations that are quite interesting on the graph. We have the notion of actions and functions. And the difference here is actions could be what we call unsafe operations. They might make changes to your data. So in this case, we're verifying to see whether a domain is correctly, and we use the post to indicate that it might be unsafe. There's also functions which use get, and they allow you to retrieve a set of data in a slightly more customized way. And you can see here, we're searching and providing a parameter in order to search for messages or data in your drives that have the keyword graph in there. And the one thing to know about functions is the data that actually comes back might not be formatted in your standard entity format. We have the freedom to return different shaped data coming back from there. Which brings us to the last two operations here, navigation and batch. These are more performance related. Navigation is interesting because here we're trying to get the primary channel from a team. Well, in many HTTP APIs, what you'd have to go and do is go and retrieve the team entity and then go and look in there and find the primary channel ID and then make a second callback. This is one of the criticisms that GraphQL folks will make about HTTP APIs. I have to make multiple round trips in order to be able to get a single piece of data. Well, using these navigation properties, you can make a single request and be able to get back those related entities. And this works for any many-to-one or one-to-one type of relationships. And batch is another scenario where you might want to get access to the user's information and also maybe their profile information and the events on the calendar. You can bundle these up into a single request and make one round trip in order to get that data. So, digging a little bit deeper into put and patch and post. So sometimes when you're making these requests, you're doing an update, you're doing a create, you want to get back the information that has been updated by your request. Maybe the server added some additional information in there. And so you want to get back that data that you've just changed. Other times, maybe you're doing an import operation. So you're bringing in lots of information that you don't really care. You know that that data is getting saved. So what you want to do is use a special header called the prefer header. And when you provide the prefer header and set return equals minimal, what you're telling the server to do is, yeah, you've got that data. I don't need to see it updated. Don't bother returning back any information. And that saves bytes over the wire. And this is one of many ways that we can save performance. So the next example is using batch to save performance. I mentioned it before, but this is what you would have to do. You create a request, you use our batch endpoint, and you create a JSON array of requests to say all the different requests that you want to make. And then what that returns is a responses array that contain multiple different responses. The problem, of course, of doing this is you have to construct these payloads. So we've decided to make it easier, and we've added capabilities into our SDK. So if you'll see in our SDK example, here we can use our standard mechanism in order to be able to make a request to go get the information about a user, go get the information about their calendar, and then create this batch request content object. In the batch request content object, you can just add those requests in, package them up, and send them over wire as a single request. And this just requires a single round trip. When you get those responses back, we have some helper methods to help you get those responses out, individual responses out, to be able to handle the results. So that makes life a lot easier when it comes to creating batches. So in the next tip, we're going to talk about the basic query parameters. And so when you're accessing a collection of data, say a set of users or a set of messages, there may be many users in the system. You may not necessarily be interested in all of the users. So one of the most powerful parameters we have is $filter. It allows you to use a standard syntax in order to be able to filter the results of your collection down to just the information that you're interested in. And it doesn't matter where you're calling on Graph, you always use the same query parameter for filtering by the rows that you want to get access to. If we look at the second parameter, $select, that allows you to reduce the payload in a different way by saying, I'm only interested in these columns. It's a projection operation that allows you to say, I just want these columns for the set of rows that I'm interested in. And if you're getting many rows back, you might want to sort them. Better to sort them on the server side than having to sort them down on the client side. And depending on how you sort them, maybe you're only interested in the top 10 results. So we have the top operator in order to limit. Maybe you only have a certain amount of UI real estate in order to be able to render them. No point bringing those extra rows back. You can go back and get the extra rows later. Which brings us to a really interesting operator, the expand operator. And this is another performance enhancing thing where instead of having to go and get a list of groups and then go as a second call to go and get the members, or worse, have to go and get the members for each group in a separate request in kind of an N+1 problem, you can use expand to make a single request and go pull all of that data down in a single result. And the result will produce a hierarchical JSON object with all the data that you're requesting. And the last two are just extra obvious ones, getting a count of data. Maybe you don't need all the data. You just want to know how many there are. Or if you want to search by a particular keyword, there are a number of entities that give you the ability to search by a particular keyword. Now, these are kind of ad hoc examples. Real power is when you start bringing these together. And these are some real world examples that we pulled out of our logs of customers who are, in the first example there, go get the latest 25 messages since a particular point in time and include the attachment size. So we're using the expand here to bring in attachments, but then further reducing that to only select the size property in attachments. This can be really helpful when you want to know, okay, well, should I go and try and retrieve those attachments? Well, maybe not, because it's like 15 megs worth of attachments, right? So this is a great way of making a very complex request to select exactly the data that you are interested in. And the lower query is interesting. It allows you to go and get a list of unified groups that a user is a member of. And you can see we're looking at users, particular user, and finding the things that they are a member of. Well, member of brings back both groups and it brings back directory roles, but we're interested only in groups. So we use this Microsoft.graph.group type as kind of a filter to say only bring back objects of that type. And then we further refine it by saying in those groups, look at the group type property, which is actually as an array. So we have to use the any operator to filter to group types that include the unified keyword as one of the values in that array. So that's a more sophisticated way of filtering down the list of information so you just retrieve what it is that you need. And so the next tip is, we've talked about things that you can do to reduce the list, but we also, as Graph APIs, reduce the things that we are necessarily returning. You tell me, oh, I want the messages. Do you really want the messages for the last 8 years, which is 7,000 or 20,000 messages? So we don't want to necessarily bring back all that data. So what we do is we paginate it. We bring back just a first page of data. And depending on the API, maybe that's 20, maybe that's 50 rows that come back. You can actually change the size of the page by using the top operator. But if you don't, we'll pick a default size. But what you have to realize is that you need to go look in that payload to see if there's an @odata.next link. And that is a signal to you that we have paginated it. And if you want to get the next page, you're going to need to follow that @odata.next link. And when you keep following those pages and retrieving the pages, at some point you'll get a page that doesn't have an @odata.next link. And that will say, okay, yes, you're done. You've got all that information. And don't forget, don't go looking into that URL and trying to extract information out of that next link. Treat it as an opaque string because there are scenarios where that link might actually change. So don't take a dependency on that. Now, you might say, well, that's a lot of work. I got to go and pull out that link and make these extra requests. Well, we've done efforts to try and make that easier for you. Into our SDKs, we've built what's called a page iterator. So you go and make that request for the first collection, that first page. And then you define the operation using a callback of what you want to do with each of those messages that come back in those pages. And you pass that information into our page iterator, and then we will iterate through all of those items on the page and all of those pages and make sure that we call that callback for you in each case. And you can do clever things. You can return a true or false from that callback. So if you're searching through items, you can pause partway through and say, oh, yes, I found the information. You can pause and you can resume. There's a bunch of functionality there that makes it easier dealing with pages. So the next tip is going to talk about tracking changes in data. So you've received a set of messages, but maybe what you're interested in is really just the messages that have actually changed. So you can use a function on that messages collection called a delta function. And that allows you to discover newly created, updated, or deleted entities without having to fully pull down the collection and compare with what you've previously received. And this is very useful for synchronizing to a local data store. And it works in much the same way. We use the odata.next link because there may be more than one page worth of changes, and you keep following those next links until you get to the odata.delta link. Now, what the odata.delta link tells you is, yes, you have finished getting at all of the changes, and you need to hold on to that delta link so that at some later point in time, you can call that delta link again, and we will tell you all of the things that have changed since you last called us. And if no changes occurred, we'll return you back to the same delta link with no responses. Now, the challenge, of course, using delta queries is, well, how often do I call? Do I call every minute? Do I call every 5 minutes? Do I call once an hour? It sometimes is not the most efficient way. There are scenarios where there's a better option, which is change notifications. And these are ideal where there's more of a low frequency number of changes, but you want to know right away. You don't want to wait for that polling period. So the way this works is you subscribe to a particular resource. In this case, we're subscribing to the mail folders and the messages on that mail folder, and you provide us with a callback URL. And when something changes, we will call back your service to tell you, yes, there is data that has changed in this particular API. And this is another valuable thing. It becomes a little bit of a problem when you have a larger volume of data. And that's where you get to combine the two things. You can actually use change notifications as the trigger to go and make your delta calls. So when you use those together, they're even better. And our tip number 6 is about using PowerShell. We recently introduced the PowerShell Graph library, and while this solves a lot of problems for IT admins, there's also some great nuggets in here for application developers. When you're creating an application, you need to create an application registration, and there's a commandlet to be able to do that. You simply call the command, tell it the name of your app, tell it whether it's a public or web client, and provide it with your redirect URLs. And if you're testing an application, you're going to go through the process of consenting regularly. And if you want to retest that scenario, you want to be able to undo that consent. Well, to do that, you need to be able to remove the service principal. And there's a PowerShell commandlet that allows you to go and find that service principal and remove the service principal. And which brings us to tip number 7. I'm going to hand it back to Ina to talk about choosing the right authentication flow and least privilege permissions.
Indeed, but let's first start with some key concepts. I'm going to talk about permissions. It's very important that you select the least privileged permissions in your application. And the way that permissions are structured is that there is a resource, for example, a mail or a file or a group. There is an action that you're executing on that data, whether it is read or read-write. And there is a scope that it applies to. So, for example, whether it is personal or to all the users or to share data. So some examples here, user.read, notes.read-write, or directory.read-write.all. Now, after that, as we mentioned before, like if you want to select the least privileged permissions of your application, you can go to Graph Explorer, and on every single request that you make, there is this modify permissions tab that you will be able to see in order of least privileged permissions, the permissions that are required to access that particular API. It is very important that you always select the minimum set of permissions that your app requires to be successful. Now, there is a second thing that we need to look into, which is like whether your application is accessing data on behalf of a user or is accessing data independently. So let's imagine that you're building an application that is accessing data on behalf of a user, whether it is an email client or a calendar scheduling bot, or for example, a people picker. There's always a user that is signed in and that it is interactively that is interacting with the application. So in this case, you will either use on behalf of flow or a device code grant flow if your application has like a limited input for like constrained devices, like for example, a watch or a TV. Now, the second type of application is an application in where there is no user in the middle, right? Like in this application, your application actually accesses the data in Microsoft Graph just without that user consideration. So this is the typical flow that will be used for service daemon application, like data loss prevention scenarios, or for user provisioning workflows. Now here, it is very important that you consider all of the security because you're accessing all of that data, not being trimmed by the permissions of a user that a user has access in the service. Now, let's take a look at those two types of applications in more detail. For the user interactive applications, the users must be signed in, must be present, and consent to with their own credentials to grant access to that application. The user consents, the application gets an access token to be able to make these API calls, and then the effective permissions of the request are the intersection of the permissions that they have been granted to the application and the permissions that the user has. Now, let's imagine that I have an email application into which we have consented access to mild mail, right? So once we get an access token, then we can make a GET request using that access token to my messages endpoint. The response is going to be a 200 because this access token is actually has the delegation to get access to that data. If I try to get access to somebody else's mailbox, like for example Daryl's, with that same access token, I'm going to get an 403 forbidden. In this case, the access is denied because there is I don't have access to Daryl's mailbox. Now, let's take a look at when it comes to interactive applications. First, if you have an email client that has a sign-in user and it's calling Microsoft Graph directly, this is a good thing to do. If you have a middle tier application, then in this case, you will use an on-behalf flow. There's always this concept of the user being present in your request. Now, the thing that you don't want to be doing is having a middle tier application where your middle tier is using an app-only flow, in which you get into this lots of problems where there's no further security trimming being done to the data that you're receiving. So this is definitely a bad choice and a bad pattern to use. Now let's look at the non-interactive applications. In this case, there is no user present. The application only has its own credentials and can interact with all of the data that it has been delegated to. So in this case, the administrator is the one that consents to these permissions, and the scope is the entire organization. There are ways in which we have for mail calendar contacts data that you can restrict to the set of users. But again, like this is mostly a wide scope access to all of the data in their organization. Then the application uses its own credentials to authenticate without a user being present. And in this case, as opposed to last one, the effective permissions of the request are all of the permissions that have been granted to the application. So let's go and look at what are some of the good and bad design choices in this case. So first of all, if you are doing let's imagine that you're doing a daemon application that is using the client credential flows to get access to Microsoft Graph data. Well, this is a good thing to do. You have to be very mindful about all of the different set of data that your app gets. But then what you don't want to do is like you use, for example, impersonating an admin to then go and use delegated flow to get access to that data. This is a very insecure practice because now, if those admin credentials are compromised, then all of that data in the organization is going to be compromised. You always want to be using the minimum set of permissions and the right authentication flow for the application that you're building. Now, with that, let's summarize that. So, you can build two types of application: a user interactive application, and in this type, it's going to be a web application, or a user interactive application like a spa. In this case, you're going to be getting access to data on behalf of users. Users or administrator can consent for them or on behalf of all the organization. And then the effective permissions are the ones that are granted to the app, and the intersection with the permissions that the calling user has at that point in time. The second model that you have is the application permissions. In this case, there's you're building whether it's a service or a daemon application. The scenario is that you will be accessing as accessing the data as a service, and only the administrator will be able to consent in this case. And the effective permissions of that application gets is all of the permissions that have been granted to the application. So with that, congratulations, you're now upskilled and you're a Microsoft Graph Ninja developer. And thank you for taking the time to see all of this content with us today. If you want to continue to connect with us, like we are, follow us on Twitter with the Microsoft 365 Dev account. Tag all of your posts with hashtag Microsoft Graph. We follow there. We interact with all of our fellow developers on those social forums. There's also a ton of videos that we have on YouTube. Every single month we have community calls where we're telling you all of the different news about Microsoft Graph. We have a developer program that you can join. It's free, and then you can get a Microsoft 365 subscription for development it will continue to be free as long as you're actively developing. And then we have content on Microsoft Learn, aka.ms/M365 Dev Training. We have Microsoft Graph learning paths. We have certifications that you can get if you go through all of these different learning content. And then there is a whole bunch of different news of the things that we're releasing at this year at Microsoft Build 2020. And that's all in our blog and multiple blogs, aka.ms M365 Dev Build News. Thank you for joining us today. And as always, if there's one thing that you got to remember is graph.microsoft.com. That's the place where you will find all of the different information about Microsoft Graph. And we're really excited that you're using Microsoft Graph in your applications. Let us know about all of the different scenarios that you're building. And see you next time. Thank you and happy coding.
Thank you.